Abandoned and scarred, he just wanted love. An older dog's tale of finding his forever home. The old oak tree stood at the edge of the deserted dirt road, its gnarled branches casting long shadows in the late afternoon sun. A rusty old tire swing hung limply from one of the lower branches, a relic of happier times. But today, the only occupant of this forgotten corner of the woods was a lone figure huddled beneath the tree, tethered by a frayed rope to its thick trunk. It was a dog, a large, scruffy creature with a coat the color of faded denim. His head hung low, his tail tucked between his legs, his body trembling slightly. The rope, tied tightly around his neck, dug into his skin, a constant reminder of his abandonment. He whimpered softly, his eyes filled with fear and confusion. He didn't know how long he'd been there, tied to that unforgiving tree. Time seemed to blur into an endless cycle of hunger, thirst, and despair. The sun beat down mercilessly, and the flies buzzed relentlessly around his wounds, open sores that spoke of neglect and perhaps even abuse. Suddenly, a flicker of movement caught his eye. A battered pickup truck was bumping its way down the dirt road, its engine sputtering like a tired old man. The dog watched with a mixture of hope and apprehension as the truck slowed to a stop beside him. Two figures emerged from the truck. A woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile, and a younger man with a sturdy build and a determined look. They approached cautiously, their voices soft and reassuring. "Hey there, fella," the woman said, her voice like a soothing balm. "Looks like you've had a rough time." The dog cowered slightly, his instincts telling him to be wary, but something in the woman's voice calmed his fear. He wagged his tail tentatively, a flicker of hope igniting in his weary heart. The man knelt down, his movements slow and deliberate. He examined the rope, his brow furrowed in concern. "Poor guy," he muttered. "Someone's been mighty cruel to you." With a few quick cuts of his pocket knife, the man freed the dog from his bonds. The dog stretched his stiff limbs, his tail wagging more vigorously now. He looked up at his rescuers with gratitude in his eyes. "Come on, fella," the woman said, opening the truck's passenger door. "Let's get you out of here." The dog hesitated for a moment. Then, with a sudden burst of trust, he jumped into the truck, settling himself on the worn bench seat. As the truck rumbled back to civilization, the dog closed his eyes, a sense of relief washing over him. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time he felt safe. The shelter was a world away from the desolate dirt road where Mush had been found. It was a bustling place, filled with the sounds of barking dogs, meowing cats, and the chatter of busy volunteers. Mush, still a little timid from his ordeal, was overwhelmed at first. But the staff at Happy Tail's shelter were experts at making newcomers feel welcome. They bathed him, treated his wounds, and fed him a hearty meal. He was given a cozy kennel with a soft blanket, a far cry from the cold, hard ground he'd been sleeping on. And most importantly, he was showered with affection. The volunteers, with their gentle touches and kind words, slowly chipped away at the wall of fear that surrounded his heart. Mush, it turned out, was a natural charmer. He had a goofy grin that could melt the hardest heart, and a clumsy gait that made him seem perpetually surprised by his own body. He loved to play with the other dogs, his long legs carrying him in a loping run that was more enthusiastic than graceful. He was like a furry, four-legged Scooby-Doo, always getting into comical situations. But beneath the playful exterior, there was a deep yearning for affection. Mush craved human touch, leaning into every petting hand, nuzzling against every leg that came within reach. He would sit patiently by the kennel door, his tail thumping hopefully whenever someone approached. It was as if he was trying to make up for a lifetime of loneliness, soaking up every ounce of love he could get. The weeks turned into months, and Mush became a favorite among the shelter staff. They took him on long walks, played fetch in the yard, and even let him curl up on their laps in the office. But as much as they loved him, they knew that what Mush truly needed was a forever home. One day, a young couple came to the shelter, their faces etched with sadness. They had recently lost their beloved dog, and their house felt empty without him. They were looking for an older dog, one who was past the puppy stage and ready for a quiet life. The shelter staff introduced them to Mush, and it was love at first sight. The couple, their hearts melting at his goofy grin and gentle nature, knew they had found their new companion. They filled out the adoption paperwork, their hands trembling with excitement. As Mush walked out of the shelter with his new family, his tail wagging so hard his whole body wiggled, the staff cheered. They knew that Mush, the clumsy, cuddle-loving dog with the sad past, had finally found the happy ending he deserved. The Millers lived in a cozy, two-story house on a quiet, tree-lined street in a small town in Connecticut. It was the kind of place where neighbors knew each other by name. Kids played freely in the yards, and the aroma of freshly baked apple pies often wafted through the air. John Miller was a high school history teacher, a man with a warm smile and a passion for storytelling. His wife, Sarah, was a librarian, her gentle nature reflected in her calm demeanor and love for books. They had 2 children, 10-year-old Emily, a bright and energetic girl with a love for animals, and 8-year-old Ben, a shy and sensitive boy with a mischievous streak. The Millers had always wanted a dog, but life had a way of getting in the way. There was always something: work commitments, school activities, the never-ending demands of raising a family. But then tragedy struck. Their beloved cat, Whiskers, a constant companion for over 15 years, passed away peacefully in his sleep. The house felt strangely quiet without Whiskers. Emily and Ben wandered around listlessly, their usual exuberance replaced by a somber silence. Even John and Sarah felt the void, a constant reminder of their furry friend's absence. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Sarah spoke up. "I think it's time," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Time for what, honey?" John asked, a puzzled look on his face. "Time to get a dog," Sarah replied, a gentle smile spreading across her face. Emily and Ben's eyes lit up. "A dog?" Emily squealed, her face beaming. "Can we, Dad? Please?" Ben chimed in, his shyness momentarily forgotten. John looked at his family, their faces filled with hope and excitement. He couldn't help but smile. "Well," he said, "I guess it's time to welcome a new member to the Miller family." The next day, they visited Happy Tail's shelter. They wandered through the kennels, their hearts aching for all the abandoned animals. Then they saw him, Mush. He was sprawled on his blanket, his long legs splayed out awkwardly, his head resting on his paws. He looked up at them with his goofy grin, his tail thumping a happy rhythm against the concrete floor. Emily and Ben were smitten. They knelt by his kennel, their fingers reaching through the wire mesh to pet his soft fur. Mush leaned into their touch, his eyes closing in contentment. "He's perfect," Sarah whispered, her eyes brimming with tears. John nodded in agreement. They knew they had found their dog. The ride home was filled with excited chatter. Emily and Ben peppered Mush with questions. "Do you like belly rubs? Can you fetch? Want to see my room?" Mush, overwhelmed by the sudden outpouring of affection, responded with enthusiastic licks and a tail that wagged so hard his whole body swayed. John, ever the cautious one, reminded the kids, "He'll need some time to adjust. Let's give him space to explore and settle in." But Mush seemed to have no intention of settling. He bounded out of the car and into the Miller's backyard, his nose twitching with excitement. The backyard was a haven for a curious dog. There were squirrels scampering up trees, birds flitting amongst the branches, and a whole world of fascinating scents to explore. Mush, with his clumsy gait and boundless enthusiasm, charged through the grass, tripping over his own feet, bumping into the rose bushes, and nearly taking a tumble into the small fish pond. The kids shrieked with laughter, their initial anxieties forgotten. "He's like Scooby-Doo," Ben exclaimed, as Mush, startled by a butterfly, leaped sideways and crashed into a stack of flower pots. Sarah, ever practical, suggested, "Maybe we should keep him on a leash for a while, just until he gets used to his new surroundings." And so began Mush's integration into the Miller family. He was a whirlwind of energy, a constant source of amusement and affection. He followed Emily and Ben everywhere, his tail wagging like a metronome keeping time with their laughter. He helped John with yard work, supervising from a comfortable spot in the grass, occasionally springing up to chase a passing ladybug. He curled up at Sarah's feet while she read, his head resting on her lap, his soulful eyes gazing up at her with adoration. There were mishaps, of course. Mush, in his enthusiasm, had a knack for knocking things over. Vases, lamps, even the occasional carefully constructed Lego tower fell victim to his wagging tail. He once managed to get stuck in the dog door, his hindquarters protruding comically while he whined for help. And his attempts at fetching were more comedic than productive, involving a lot of running in circles and tripping over his own feet. But through it all, the Millers never lost patience. They understood that Mush's clumsiness was just a part of his charm, a reflection of his exuberant spirit and his eagerness to please. They showered him with love and understanding, slowly building his confidence and helping him to heal from the wounds of his past. As the days turned into weeks, Mush began to relax. The fear in his eyes faded, replaced by a sense of contentment. He learned the routines of the house, knew when it was time for walks, meals, and bedtime cuddles. He became a true member of the Miller family, a furry, four-legged source of unconditional love and endless entertainment. Life with the Millers was a dream come true for Mush. He had a warm bed, plenty of food, and most importantly, an endless supply of love and affection. He thrived in the family's routine, finding comfort in the predictability of their days. But even in this idyllic setting, the shadows of his past sometimes crept in. One evening, a summer thunderstorm rolled through town. The wind howled, the rain lashed against the windows, and thunder boomed like cannon fire. Mush, who had been dozing peacefully at John's feet, bolted upright, his eyes wide with terror. He whimpered, his body trembling, his tail tucked between his legs. The Millers, startled by his sudden panic, tried to comfort him. "It's okay, Mush," Sarah soothed, stroking his fur. "It's just a storm." But Mush wasn't listening. He paced frantically, his claws clicking on the hardwood floor, his whimpers escalating into distressed barks. John, recognizing the signs of deep-seated fear, led Mush to the quietest room in the house, a small den tucked away at the back. He sat on the floor, his arm around Mush, speaking to him in low, calming tones. Emily and Ben, their faces etched with concern, sat beside him, gently stroking Mush's trembling body. It took hours for the storm to pass, and for Mush to calm down. As the thunder subsided and the rain softened to a gentle drizzle, Mush finally relaxed, his head resting on John's lap, his breathing slow and even. The Millers knew then that Mush's past held painful memories, likely associated with loud noises or a sense of vulnerability. They vowed to be extra patient and understanding, creating a safe haven where Mush could feel secure, no matter what storms raged outside. The next day, Sarah called the shelter. She spoke to one of the volunteers who had cared for Mush, learning what she could about his history. The volunteer, her voice filled with sadness, explained that Mush had been found tied to a tree, emaciated and wounded. They suspected he had been abused, perhaps even used as a bait dog in illegal dogfighting rings. Sarah's heart ached for Mush. She imagined the terror he must have endured, the loneliness, the pain. She vowed to make the rest of his life as happy and carefree as possible. From that day on, the Millers were extra vigilant. They avoided loud noises, shielded Mush from stressful situations, and showered him with constant reassurance. Slowly, Mush began to trust again. He learned that the world wasn't always a scary place, that there were people who loved him, who would protect him, who would never let him down. The shadows of his past remained, but they no longer held him captive. He was free to be himself, a goofy, clumsy, cuddle-loving dog with a heart full of love to give. With the storm clouds of Mush's past beginning to dissipate, the Millers focused on filling his days with sunshine. And what better way to do that than with adventures? Mush, they discovered, was an enthusiastic traveler, especially when the destination involved a pup cup. Every Sunday, they piled into the family minivan, Mush included, for a day trip. Sometimes they'd head to the beach, where Mush would gleefully chase waves and roll in the sand. Other times, they'd explore hiking trails in the nearby state park, Mush sniffing out every interesting scent and occasionally startling a squirrel or two. But Mush's favorite destination was the local ice cream shop, known for its generous pup cups. Small cups filled with vanilla ice cream, just for dogs. Mush would sit patiently beside the minivan, his tail wagging expectantly, while the Millers went inside to order. As soon as they returned with his pup cup, his eyes would light up, and he'd devour the treat in a matter of seconds, leaving a trail of melted ice cream on his whiskers. These outings weren't just about fun and pup cups, though. They were about creating shared experiences, building memories, and strengthening the bond between Mush and his new family. John would teach Mush new tricks in the park. Sarah would read to him under the shade of a tree. Emily would braid wildflowers into his fur, and Ben would share his snacks with him. Mush, in turn, brought a new dimension to the Millers' lives. He encouraged them to be more active, to explore their surroundings, to appreciate the simple pleasures of life. He taught them patience, forgiveness, and the unconditional love that only a dog can offer. One sunny afternoon, they decided to visit a local farm that offered hayrides and a petting zoo. Mush, never one to shy away from new experiences, eagerly hopped onto the hay wagon, his tail wagging excitedly. He watched with fascination as the horses pulled the wagon through the fields. His ears perked up at the sounds of mooing cows and bleating goats. At the petting zoo, Mush was in his element. He sniffed noses with a friendly goat, wagged his tail at a curious llama, and even attempted to play with a piglet, much to the amusement of the farm visitors. As the sun began to set, the Millers gathered around Mush, their faces glowing with happiness. "You're a part of our family now, Mush," Sarah said, stroking his fur. "We love you." Mush, unable to express his love in words, responded in the best way he knew how. He licked Sarah's hand, his tail thumping a happy rhythm against the hay bale. He had found his forever home, and his heart was overflowing with joy. Time, as it always does, marched on. Seasons changed. Leaves turned from vibrant green to fiery hues of orange and red, then fell to the ground, only to be replaced by a blanket of winter snow. And with the passing years, Mush, like the leaves on the trees, began to show the signs of age. His once boundless energy gradually waned. The playful sprints across the backyard became leisurely strolls. The enthusiastic leaps onto the sofa were replaced by careful climbs, aided by a strategically placed footstool. His muzzle, once a rich chocolate brown, became sprinkled with gray. His gait, always a bit clumsy, grew a little stiffer, a little slower. But even as his body aged, Mush's spirit remained young. His love for the Millers, if anything, deepened with time. He still greeted them with a wagging tail and a goofy grin, still craved their cuddles and affection. He still followed them from room to room, content to simply be in their presence. The Millers, in turn, cherished every moment with their aging companion. They adapted to his changing needs, adjusting their routines to accommodate his slower pace. Walks became shorter, playtime became gentler, and naps became more frequent. They took him to the vet regularly, monitoring his health with a mix of vigilance and tenderness. When arthritis stiffened his joints, they provided him with a soft orthopedic bed and helped him up and down the stairs. When his eyesight began to fail, they guided him gently, their voices reassuring him that he was safe. Through it all, Mush remained the heart of the Miller family. He was a constant source of comfort and joy, a reminder of the simple pleasures of life, the importance of love and companionship. Emily and Ben, now teenagers, confided their secrets to Mush, finding solace in his non-judgmental presence. John and Sarah, their hair streaked with gray, found comfort in his quiet companionship, a reminder of the enduring power of love. One crisp autumn evening, as the family gathered around the fireplace, Mush curled up at their feet, his head resting on Sarah's lap. The fire crackled, casting a warm glow over the room, creating a sense of peace and contentment. "Look at him," Sarah whispered, her voice filled with love. "He's our old man now." John smiled, stroking Mush's fur. "He's still got that same goofy grin, though." Emily and Ben, their teenage angst momentarily forgotten, leaned down to pet their beloved dog. "We love you, Mush," Emily said softly. Mush, his eyes half closed, thumped his tail weakly against the floor, a silent affirmation of his love. He was surrounded by his family, warm and safe, his heart filled with gratitude for the life he had been given. He was content. Winter arrived, blanketing the town in a pristine layer of white. The miller's house, adorned with festive decorations, exuded warmth and cheer. But inside, a somber mood prevailed. Mush's health had taken a turn for the worse. He slept most of the time now, his once bright eyes clouded with age. His appetite had diminished, and his walks had become painfully slow. The vet had warned them that the end was near. The Millers, their hearts heavy with grief, rallied around their beloved companion. They took turns staying by his side, whispering words of love and comfort. They spoiled him with his favorite treats, soft blankets, and endless cuddles. Emily and Ben, now young adults, took time off from college to be with Mush during his final days. They reminisced about their childhood adventures, the countless hours spent playing fetch, the silly antics that had filled their home with laughter. One snowy afternoon, as the sun cast long shadows across the living room, Mush stirred from his slumber. He looked at his family, his eyes filled with a deep, knowing love. He wagged his tail weakly, a final gesture of affection. Sarah, sensing the end was near, gathered her family close. They knelt beside Mush, their hands gently stroking his fur. Tears streamed down their faces as they whispered their goodbyes. Mush, surrounded by the love that had transformed his life, closed his eyes and peacefully slipped away. A collective sob echoed through the room as the Millers mourned the loss of their faithful companion. The next few days were a blur of grief and remembrance. The Millers shared stories of Mush's clumsiness, his love of pup cups, his unwavering devotion. They laughed through their tears, celebrating the joy he had brought into their lives. They buried Mush in their backyard, beneath his favorite oak tree. A simple headstone marked his resting place, inscribed with the words, "Our beloved Mush, forever in our hearts." Life without Mush was different, quieter. The house seemed to echo with his absence. But the Millers knew that Mush's spirit lived on, woven into the fabric of their family. They carried his memory with them, a reminder of the unconditional love, the unwavering loyalty, and the simple joys that had enriched their lives. And whenever they felt lost or alone, they would picture his goofy grin, his clumsy gait, and his love for cuddles, and their hearts would fill with warmth. Mush, the once abandoned dog who had only wanted to be loved, had found his forever home and left an indelible mark on the hearts of those who had loved him in return. His story was a testament to the power of compassion, the resilience of the spirit, and the enduring bond between humans and their animal companions.